We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Hilchot Shabbat. We are up to Siman Shin Aleph Seif Mem Gimel Daf Pei Daled Amud Bet of the regular prints of your Mishna Beruras. Hamotzeh Sefer Torah Basadeh. If you find a Sefer Torah in a field, again, you'll be surprised these things unfortunately do happen. Like, a person that had vandalized a shul, and they took Sefer Torahs. Unfortunately, at some point they realized they didn't have the bandwidth to sell. So they took the silver crowns and so on and so forth. And then the Sefer Torah itself, is a parchment, unfortunately they had thrown out, and people found them. So Motzeh Sefer Torah Basada. You find a Sefer Torah in a field, if it's not dangerous for you to be carrying this because it's banned and so on, Yoshev shamero machshichal. Now, it's not like tefillin that Shulchan Aruch said in Seif Membet that you wear them pairs and you bring them in because that's considered malbush. Sefer Torah you cannot wear; it's not the malbush. So you do the second best thing is sitting next to it, covering it nicely, staying until Motzei Shabbat to be able to take it. What do you do if it's now raining? Now that's going to completely ruin the Sefer Torah. Mit'atef be'or ve'chozer umchase oto ve'nichnas bo. So you wrap it around yourself. Mit'atef be'or. And then you cover on top of it that it should not be a bizayon. You put your talit on it after you wear it, so to speak, on you. And you bring it in because you don't want the Sefer Torah to be mekalkel, to ruin the gshamim, to ruin the Sefer Torah. Says the Mishna Berura, hitiru lo leit'atef vechozer umit'atef bebigadim, because of the kavod of Sefer Torah not to get ruined and pasul. The Chazal were matir, that's just like a leather coat, so to speak. You're wearing a very expensive $50,000 leather coat. You wrap yourself around it, and you wrap on top of it your clothing, not to, again, be a disgrace that you're wrapping the Sefer Torah around yourself. You cover it on top with your garments, with your clothing, v'nichnas, and then you go in. Shezeu kevodah. This is not a disgrace to it. This is actually the kavod of the Torah, not to get ruined under the rain. So therefore, Chazal made an exception to the rule to allow this under these circumstances. Now, obviously, the Shulchan Aruch says if it's not shat sakara, if it's shat sakara, they're going to get killed if you carry the Sefer Torah or if you sit next to it and protect it. Then you just have to leave it and leave. That's the life of a person is obviously more important than anything else, right? Now, this borders on a lot of very interesting questions. In the olden days, the Jewish communities used to go whenever the king would visit their town. The Jewish communities with the rabbis and the poskim and dayanim, they will all go, with the entire layman of the Jewish people will go to greet the king, and as a sign of kavod, they would bring out the Sifrei Torah to greet the king. That was the minhag, to show that we don't take the Sefer Torah for anything. We take it for your kavod, something so important to us. This was again the kavod of the Melech is something we're commanded on. Not just that we daven for the well-being of the countries we live in. It's actually very interesting to have found a Siddur that was published in Germany in the early late 1930s, actually. Yeah, right in the beginning, when Hitler Ymach Shemo won the election, so to speak, he came to power, and this thing that was published. Tfilah Shlom Malchut, and he has in it the name of Adolf Hitler. The Jewish communities were davening for him, because that's what we do. We not for him. His name should be erased, but we always are not just helpful, but we daven for the well-being of the communities that we live in and we dwell in. In any case, the minhag of going out to greet the king whenever there is a chashash of tiltul an Shabbat in Reshut Harabim, right? This is already an old she'ela in Shelot Shuot Bikurei Yaakov. He explains this, he speaks about this at length, his story that the king actually came to Tiberia on Erev Shabbat. Right, so the king was visiting Tiberia on Erev Shabbat, and the communities had this question, right? People were preparing to greet the king properly, the proper Kabbalat Panim, right? And the community, not just the Goyim, but the Jews were very much excited, and they were prepared to come to see him, and what they wanted to bring all the Sefer Torahs, like the minhag was always, right? And then they had this safek that maybe until he comes and the whole entourage and the music and this, maybe it's not going to be enough time to bring back the Sefer Torah after the Kabbalat Panim, bring back the Sefer Torah to the Reshut HaYachid, to the shul, and not to have to deal with carrying the Sefer Torah in Reshut Harabim, right? And again, he deals with this. He brings the Khatam Sofer, whether or not they we are matir certain things, for men and women to sing in a choir for the kavod of the king. And so again, this has been always a question what you can and you can't bend for kavod malchut. So this again is a she'ela that nowadays, again, we don't reckon with this the same way. We don't have the same mitziut necessarily, but this has been always a serious question. Now, Chacham Ovadia actually writes in Yabi Omer, he says the way he paskins that even a isur derabanan you cannot transgress if it's not shat sakara, if it's not a danger. Even a prohibition, the Rabbanan, a person should not be transgressing. Mishum kavod hamelech, for instance, taking out the Sefer Torah in a Carmelit, in a place that's not Reshut Harabim Doraita, still is something that a person should be careful. Now, we mentioned that if it's Shat Sakana, that there is ban against learning Torah, against respecting Torah, then if you find a Sefer Torah like that, you have to just leave it, basically, right? The Ramah says this clearly over here. His language is ubesakana manicho ve'olechlo. In shat sakana, you just leave it and go, right? So the Imam Mordechai writes that the reason for this is that because you can't put it on like tefillin, right? That you wear them and you could cover them, get away with it easily. Here, it's a long Sefer Torah. It's a big thing. It's not, it's going to be a problem. It was sitting next to it. It will be a problem. People will see, and it will be dangerous, and so on. Therefore, it's halachically a little bit different than the case of the tefillin. So it says the Shulchan Aruch in Seif Mem Dalet, Haba la'atzil kelav mipnei adeleka. If you are dealing with a fire, right? On Shabbat, chas v'shalom. You have to deal with the fire on Shabbat. How do you go about saving things? Can't take them out to the Reshut Harabim. That would be a problem, obviously, right? So lovesh kol ma sheyachol lilvosh. You go where the expensive stuff that you have, whatever you can put on yourself, you wear, right? That's one time, the only time maybe that it helps to have like oversized clothing, like you can wear them on top of the other ones, right? Ve'otef kol ma sheyachol la'atof. You can wrap yourself with atifa, even a number of times over each other. Uposhet ve'chozer ve'lovesh. And you go out, you bring them to safety, you take all of them off, you come back, you wear, and you go back, and you repeat the same process. That's how you could carry out and take out your belongings, your garments at least, to safety on Shabbat, right? Because that obviously is considered, derech malbush is not considered a problem, right? If you don't allow this person to do it, even though that it sounds ridiculous that he's wearing like 15 layers on top of one another, if you're not going to allow him, a person is bahul al mamoro, a person is always worried about their money, and under duress, under stressful moments, a person makes mistake. Most of the mistakes people make is under stressful situations. So here, a person is so sensitive and attached to their belongings that if you don't allow them to do it, they will desecrate Shabbat, go to turn off the deleka, and that would be obviously a problem. So therefore, we allow them to do this. Now, we have to discuss later on in Siman Lamed Dalet. We're going to be discussing this a lot more in details. We had serious questions this year in the fires a few weeks ago that consumed many areas, residential areas, like the whole Pacific Palisade basically was flattened by the fires, and many people only had minutes to take whatever they can and run. Imagine, you have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. So what do you take? You have a safe that you could empty with, a lot of things in it. You have, valuables. You could have like a painting that's worth $50,000, $100,000, and then you have a set of shas at home. That's worth maybe $400, $300, but it's it's heavy and it's big and you have to take it out. It takes time. So it'll take you all the 5 minutes. Let alone if you have an actual Sefer Torah. What do you take out? How do you deal with prioritizing what to save, what not to save in the time, a stressful time of fire and there's minutes. Especially again nowadays that there's no stones and bricks, it's all wood. The structures, like the thing could catch on, and also electricity inside, and it could be extremely dangerous. Mamash sakarat nefashot. So it becomes a question that has to be dealt with. This is something that we're going to be dealing with in Siman Shel Lamed Dalet as we develop these sugyas. But that certainly is not. These are not. Especially as the Mishna Berura seems over there to indicate that still a person should be saving the Sifrei Kodesh versus all the other things. So these are things that have serious ramifications of halakha l'maaseh, which we have to study together. But for meanwhile, we do what we do, and we go on. Misha nishru kelav b'mayim. If you were going through the water, or your garments fell into water and they became soaked with water, they're drenched with water, right? So you're wearing your clothing, you became wet, either because it was raining very hard or because you fell into water, however you slice it, right? Holech ba'em ve'eno choshesh. You don't have to take them off. I mean, you can't even really take them off because you could walk with them, even though that they're soaked with water. There is like 2 cups of water in your, or more, in your shirt, and you are carrying it. You're carrying the water that could be squeezed out of your garments. So you're carrying 3 cups of water on you on Shabbat, and it's fine. Holech ba'em. You could go with them. Ve'eno choshesh. I have to be worried. Shema yavo lidei schita. You have to be careful. Maybe you're going to come to schita. V'lo yishtachem lenakvam, and you should not spread them to dry them. Because when someone sees that you have a soaked wet shirt on a rope to dry, what's the immediate thought? The immediate thought is, I thought this chacham is chacham. right? I thought he's from. I didn't know that he washed his clothing. That's Isur Doraita. That says Marit Ayin. So you don't want to do that. Shelo yachshedu she'ki besan b'Shabbat. Now people should not suspect him that he washed them on Shabbat. Afilu b'chadrei hadarim. Even if your rope is so-called in chadrei hadarim, it's in 3 rooms locked inside each other, still is asur, because kol milta, anything that is asur because of Marit Ayin, afilu b'chadrei hadarim is asur. Even if it's in a private, super duper private place, it's still asur. She'en sham ro'im is no, even though that there's nobody that's seeing it, is still asur. V'lo asru ela shotchan. They only asked Chazal to spread them, to hang them, to dry. But if you have done it before Shabbat, you spread them on a rope from before Shabbat, you had a moment before Shabbat to do it, then it would be fine, even though that during Shabbat they're going and dripping and getting dried, it is fine. You're not mechuyav to take them off on Shabbat. So that is the halacha in regards to the bigadim that get wet. And Maran writes in Seif Memvav, another additional din is you can't also put them next to your fireplace to dry them, right? The bigadim that became soaked in water on Shabbat, you can't put them, asur lenagevam samuch laesh, you can't dry them next to the fire. And the Rama adds, you can't even carry them. Shema yavo lideschita. Maybe you're going to come to actually squeeze them because they're soaked, they're wet. And that's only talking about a case that you actually care about the water that's in there. It's asur to walk in a place that you could slip and fall inside the water, because maybe you're going to actually slip and fall in the water, and then your garments are going to be wet, and then you're going to come to schita. So Chazal banned a person walking on the edge of somewhere that you could slip and fall into the water. You don't want to get to this situation, because this situation, there's no real good answer out of the mess. What are you going to do? You're soaked with water, you fell into water. So now you can't even touch your clothing, because touching them is going to make them, you can't even handle the soaked, drenched garments, because that by itself is going to schita them. So therefore, we want to make sure nobody comes to this situation on Shabbat, and therefore you should not be going to a place that the chances are you're going to fall into the water. One more piece over here on Mem Zayin says the Shulchan Aruch, Lo yishtach adam et kelav v'Shabbat afilu min haze'ah. Even if you did not wash it, did not get soaked in the water, you just were walking fast or had to run away for something, and now you became wet from sweat. You sweated enough that now your undergarment is wet, and you want to just put, you change your undershirt, you want to put it to dry. You can't put it, hang it to dry on a rope. Even though that's not washed, it's min haze'ah, still would be a problem, because it's pretty much the same thing as the discussion that we had before. Now, Rabbi Tzchak Yosef writes in Yalkot Yosef that because of this reason, it's asur to have like a bunch of chairs next to each other, and put on top of the chairs and the back of the chairs, put like a sheet or something that has become wet, because that is clear that you're trying to dry it. It's clear that your kavanah is to dry the sheet, not that you just keeping it there. Now, if you had like a shirt, like a man's shirt, and you're putting it around the back of one chair, that people usually also do for it not to get wrinkled and so on, so that would be fine if it's a little wet. But you don't want to do more than that in a clear way, when people know clearly that the kavanah, what you're doing is to spread them to dry, that you don't want to do. Okay. Now, the Ben Ish Chai writes in Pashat Vayechi in the very beginning that normally people spread something, hang something to dry when it's wet, right? Yeah, they do it. So when we say that something has gotten wet because of ze'ah, because of sweat, because you've been jogging, walking, running, and it became wet, is orcha demilta, is the normal case. That's why they mentioned this case, because you usually don't spread or hang something to dry if they're not wet. You only hang them to dry if they need to be dried, which means they have some sort of moist, they have their wetness, right? But even if they're dry, it's still asur to hang them on a rope that usually is used for drying wet clothing, right? Even though you're not actually drying them, the reason is because of chashad, because people see that the Shabbat morning you had nothing on the rope, and now Shabbat at 11 o'clock you have shirts on the rope. Like, wait a second, I can't tell if it's wet, it's not wet. They'll just see that and say, oh, Mrs. So-and-so washed the garments on Shabbat, or Spa cleaned the things on Shabbat, and that obviously would be a problem, says the Ben Ish Chai, because that's the gezerah of Chazal, right? But Lemaaseh, aside from Chacham Ovadia, even Or Letzion does not seem to be happy with this psak, and he says that it's only if it's tofeach al minad latbiach, if it's something that is wet enough that you touch it, your finger gets wet enough to wet something else, that is the level of a wetness that you need for it to become asur to handle it and to hang it to dry. But if it's not that much sweat, it's not that much wetness, and certainly if it's dry, then it's mutar. You don't have to necessarily be machmir. But Chacham Ovadia does write in Halichot Olam on that. Ben Ish Chai says, even though Mikar Adin is mutar, l'chatchila you should do it in a way that people don't do on regular days. That someone that sees from far says, oh, that's not how we do it, and she never does it. Nobody does it like this. So they'll understand that this has not been a regular laundry. This has not been a regular case of washing clothing. So that's something to keep in mind as well. B'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue this in the days to come. Hazaku Baruch.